And thank you for your tremendous service to our nation and everybody else in here. And the men and women that serve around the clock, we're mindful in terms of your sacrifices and what that means for freedom, what that means to national security and really homeland security. Because the war that you fought since 9/11 has clearly made it safer here in the United States. Make no mistake about it. No doubt that there's been things that were prevented as a result of the efforts of the men and women in our U.S. military. There's no fight. There's never been any fighter military in the United States. I'm a little partial to the Army, having a daughter that's an Apache helicopter pilot. So you'll have to forgive me if you're in the Coast Guard, Navy. I know we got a P-3 pilot with the Customs right now that serve brave with the Navy as well. But of course, in the Department of Public Safety, and I serve right now as its director, we have a number of Marines, including my deputy director, and I always have to hear the Marine thing. But at the end of the day, a lot to be learned from law enforcement camp what the military does. And I can tell you that we get it in Texas that the securing the border is the sovereign responsibility of the federal government, period. Make no mistake about it. We understand that. And I can tell you, I haven't talked to a legislator, and I haven't talked to, and certainly Governor Abbott and Governor Patrick, and no one wants to spend money and divert it from the few discretionary funds they have, but they want to spend in infrastructure or education and divert it to something that's not the responsibility of the state government. But at the same point in time, they also clearly understand when you talk about consequences and threat, you can't ignore the impact or the consequences of an unsecured border with Mexico. And it's been, it's taken a while for that to resonate in the public, but it's going back to 2005 to see how this thing has changed in terms of not just the homeland security standpoint, but how it impacts our communities. Even our middle schools where black tar heroin is being pushed into the Dallas area. Transnational gangs like MS-13. Whoever thought that Houston, Texas would be a hub for MS-13? That was a Virginia, Northern Virginia, a Long Island, New York, and Miami problem. It was never a Texas problem, but it is now. And with them, of course, we're concerned about the narcocultura, this culture that's migrated into it, that glamorizes the cartel bosses, okay, and the cartel operations, and the killing and butchering of women and children, which is what happened. And if you look at it in terms of the threat picture, based upon what's the most significant threat to Texas, it's a Mexican, from an organized crime standpoint, it's the Mexican cartels, period, times two. And their collaboration, close collaboration, and interrelationship with the state-based gangs and transnational gangs. There's not I'll use an example, just quickly, is that we've got one investigation that we've worked, and it's been concluded, where you had the Mexican Mafia working with Tango Blast, which is a rival prison gang, working with an Asian gang, okay, working with a Bloods sect, okay, an African-American gang, working with the Aryan Brotherhood, okay, quite racist. It was all about meth, it was all about the Gulf Cartel, working with them. So when it comes to, the spreading the poison into our streets, they can get along. That race thing, they can put aside. They can work together and collaborate. Why it's so important that we, as a law enforcement community, and we as a, homeland security community, including, all of the different federal partners, need to work together. And since we do know it's not the state's responsibility to do this, you have to look at what doctrine is, how do we fit in. We certainly don't want to waste money and duplicate things, and we don't want to do anything that's not based on evidence and science. Something, the principle is it worked before. Let's do something. We can always run up the numbers and statistics. It doesn't do any good. So, guess what? Drugs and people coming north. No surprise, right? In Texas, as a result of what's happened, Dante from DA is going to be here this afternoon, and he can go in terms of talk about Mexican cartels and how bad is bad, and what some of the command and control networks in Texas, operating in Texas. And you can even go back to when him and I were in Tucson, back when all of a sudden it was Rafael Carpintero back there, and then all of a sudden this guy named Mamado Cudio Fuentes out of Juarez became the Lord of the Skies, and you saw the Mexican organization start to take over, not just in terms of the transportation, but really, running and demanding a half the load. And then pretty soon dictating to the Colombians in terms of how it's going to go. And there's nobody been more vicious in our organized crime activities, not for just internal security, but than the Mexican cartels. If You look from a Texas standpoint, in 2014, we got involved seriously in the border business in 2014 when these numbers were prevalent. And the bottom line is the epicenter for drug and human smuggling became the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, the gateway. And as Starr County went, so did the rest of the nation. You got a Zeta problem in New York, you got a Starr County problem, okay? You got a Gulf cartel problem, you got a Texas problem, you got a border problem. Because there's nothing that crosses the border that stays in that area. Well, there's a little bit that stays in that area, okay? But the most of it is destined elsewhere. People and drugs are destined elsewhere. And, you know, the collaboration in terms of how they operate, we'll call it the smuggling network or infrastructure on our side of the border, is the gangs. And if you look at Starr County, it's the Texas Chicano Brotherhood, is the gang that provides them that material support. And all these gangs, if you look at any of these gangs that we're dealing with, this collaboration going on, empowering them with this type of drugs, this type of money and revenue, and these partnerships, and conducting, you know, hits for the cartels, is something that's not surprising. I mean, always gangs have been responsible for. If you look at the PDCJ prisoners right now, the gang members, I mean, 61% of them aren't there for white-collar crime. Okay, they're not there for drug violations. They're there for violent crime. And if you're a blood-in organization and blood-out, means that you come into the Texas Syndicate, you'll never leave. When you get out of prison, you're going to continue to work within the Texas Syndicate. Period. But if we can see, you can see the amount at that point in time. And that was, at the same time, Border Patrol was inundated with these unaccompanied children. And they weren't geared for it. That's not Border Patrol's job. Okay? Border Patrol's job is they use their detention facilities was not built for children. There's a 48-hour requirement that they be turned over, the children over to Health and Human Services. They weren't ready and prepared, the infrastructure, to be able to handle that. So you had a crisis. And it required Border Patrol to divert their online resources to the detention capacity, and they tried to quickly build that up. But at the same time, as the general noted, we had an influx from Central America that we hadn't seen before. I mean, even today, 70%, 75% of all apprehensions are from Central America coming across the border. Let's still get the video here.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
A little over 20 people at least.
You can't make some stuff up. Oh, this one was I wanted to get first. Let's see how that works. Not necessarily. What do I want to do here?
Oh my.
That's a technical aircraft.
Can be about jumped out of that Jeep living.
118 West, look on Major 1050. Major 1050 on the exchange, on the interchange. Give fire to EMS. Southbound interchange. Crash. Major 1050.
I mean, these, you know, we call these bailouts, and of course those pursuits, sometimes they're filled with people, and they're driving 100 miles an hour on US 83. The one coming this way in the white shirt, of course, that's the coyote. That's the one that's responsible, and he sends all the other ones in the other direction. Now, if you're a rancher or a farmer, they've been plagued with these bailouts because you know, the cattle gets out, they damage the property, and when they're continuous, it's been a concern. And of course, we've always been concerned about these high-speed pursuits. They'll go through school zones, they'll time it in that regard. So there is an impact in the community. You've seen these stash houses. This is actually in Houston. To give you an idea, the problem with these stash houses is this: is that the amount of women and children that are preyed upon in these locations. And it's just, there's something, what the cartels have done, it's not enough to make the money when they get across. What they've done is, and it's also the gangs that support them, then they'll hold on to them in effect, kidnapping, and extort them for more money, and threaten the families along those lines, and keep them there, and lock them up. So that is a part of the business model. And our side of the border, they're doing that. There's another cottage industry in the Rio Grande Valley that's a direct result of the smuggling that goes on. This is a home security video. You see the tricycle, the toys in the back, the kids' toys. We got spy on spy, gangs on gangs, ripping each other off. And that's, they don't always get the right house, and they're always brutal when they do so. This is something else that you got to come up with terms, because you don't see this in other parts of the country. These splashdowns, which may not mean anything to you, but what the cartels do is they coordinate very well, not unlike small military tactics. It's one of the things that General Seal said and McCaffrey did when they looked at it. So this is not unlike, because they use secure communications to be able to. Let's see. And when they're detecting, they'll go back to the river. They'll coordinate with the cartels. And
Okay, we got last in the water, a bunch of people on the U.S. side.
And the cartels got the nerve.
I'm trying to get home to get it back on.
Law enforcement on our side. They come over and pick up their dope.
Yeah.
Very well coordinated, as you can see. And they protect their people on the other side of the border, from the other side of the border. I don't have this in the PowerPoint, but I can tell you that over 100 officers have been shot at from Mexico, during primarily Border Patrol agents. We've had.
For the support,
This one right here. Right.
Okay, we got last in the water, a bunch of people on the U.S. side. Got 3 rats coming your way. I'm trying to get home and get it back on time to stay on.
Now, military experts understand it. When you get on the river, like what we ask Border Patrol to do, and you get on the river, and you've got Carrizo cane and salt seeds on one side so thick you can't see it. When you blow in that water, you're really in an ambush situation. Okay, and we're dealing with people that butchered, over 100,000 people. They don't care. In fact, they're the only organized crime group that I've worked in my career that had taken brutality to the level that they had. They've used tactics that ISIS doesn't use. I mean, they're that brutal and depraved. They don't care. To make a point, they'll cut up women and children. And they'll do it just to make a point. And that's the type of people that we're dealing with. And it's one of the reasons we worry about our officers down in this location. I talked to our troopers yesterday in the in-service school and said, in 09 when I took this position, I never would have thought that we'd be standing up a Navy within the Department of Public Safety and put highway patrol on a boat. But in the end, the legislature and governor directed said they didn't want this. And Texans made it very clear to their legislators and the governor, is that we needed to do something proactive. And of course, we're not going to put troopers on the water unless they can defend themselves. Plain and simple. With 3 Texas Rangers and our tactical team shot at from a pump house, of course that was kind of a signal. And our boats looked nondescript. But moving to a tactical boat, not unlike what the military uses, has allowed us to position our people so they're able to defend themselves, number one. And number two, we haven't been shot at once. Not one time since we've been on the river. And yet Border Patrol has been routinely shot at in their boats. This is the latest and greatest, not necessarily, until I come over here. We went to the 300 horsepower, 6-man version or 6-person boat with 6 machine guns down to a 3-1, but it's a jet boat. The reason for it is the cartels are moving into the shallow waters. This is going to operate in 2 feet of water. So it's ironically, we're not militarizing the border. I mean, the Mexican cartels did that. Okay, that's what the Zetas were. Okay, they were trained military, special forces, or maybe not at that level, but trained and ready to go work with the Mexican military and sent off to compromise the Gulf cartel, and then they themselves got compromised in so doing. But if we're going to put people on the river, we need to be able to defend ourselves. Tactical operations. This is some of our Ranger Recon team. Okay. U.S. Working with our Texas military forces. That's a Black Hawk helicopter, with a DPS SWAT team on it. Be able to quickly react. Jump to this. Okay, what's the state to do? Well, we don't want to duplicate anything. We know it's Border Patrol's got the lead. We don't want to run out there and just do things that don't matter. We like the military model because we like, in Texas, you got 1,757 law enforcement agencies at the local level. Okay, several at the federal level, and several at the state. Well, how do you get everybody working together? This unified command thing they came up with, oh, by the way, it works. There's an advantage of doing it, especially if you're talking about, impacting or doing around-the-clock, patrol-based type of operations. And so what's the strategic intent? It's very simple. So we're there, okay, to help, to provide direct support to U.S. Border Patrol, and our job as DPS is to coordinate, local, but also state support, and that's the National Guard, and that's also game wardens. We put the game wardens out there on that river, too. And to do that, okay, to help Border Patrol to deter, detect, and interdict, smuggling between the ports of entry on the border. I mean, the game has to be fought on the border. You can't secure it, okay, 62 miles off, plain and simple. And it was clear, the government made it very clear, we're not going to give up parts of Texas, okay, to cartels. We're not going to say we're going to wait for the drugs and people to come to us in Brooks County and Kennedy County. We're going to fight it right on the river. Now again, going back to why not look at, especially if I'm involved in it, we've got to dumb this thing down, right? Why not find something that works? And if you look back, and Border Patrol has done this before, and I've testified before Congress, if Border Patrol is given the resources, the technology, they can secure it, period. Make no mistake about it. There's no doubt about it that can be done. If they're given the right resources, it can be done. An example, in 1993, in a 20-mile stretch, okay, Congressman Sylvester Reyes was the Border Patrol Secretary Chief back then. And he, by instituting this surge, taking Border Patrol agents and surging them right on the border as a border control strategy, is what he did. And he put Border Patrol agents inside El Paso PD vehicles, and what happened was an immediate drop in terms, because this is going to try to make money. And when you do that, you lose money, and therefore you push it elsewhere. You displace it. And that's exactly what he did. And in doing so, they also reduced the El Paso crime rate, El Paso city crime rate in doing so. So it's not like the Border Patrol hasn't had a good record of doing it when given the resources. So, and if you do, when I talk about border control strategies, in fact, that 93 operation was, the San Diego National Laboratory looked at that, and GAO looked at it and said, that's the way to go. Because what's happening is you're not waiting for it to come in and arresting it, okay? You're preventing it to come in. It's a preventive strategy. We did the same thing in 2013, 3 weeks, because we got sick and tired of those high-speed crashes and people getting killed. So we took it upon ourselves, took our resources. Well, let's try a surge operation with Border Patrol. Let's take troopers from around the state, move them down there. Let's do some checkpoints. That wasn't very popular, the checkpoints, by the way, okay? Had to quit that. But do that, and what happened is, get in the cartel's face. And what happened is, you'll see these statistics, it's a no-brainer. Of course the cartel's not going to bring these types of, they're not going to bring it across. They're not going to bring drugs across when we're standing there. They want to make money. 8 implementation principles. First of all, you got to secure it at the border. You can't do it off the border. You can't do it 2 counties away. You got to put people in the ground at the border. Integration of effort. You have to use the military model of unified command. Everyone's got to be on the same team. You've got to do it around the clock. You've got to prioritize efforts. If the center of gravity is Starr County, you need to start there. You don't need to start in Hudspeth County out in West Texas or other counties where there's little. It's easier, certainly easier to secure, but you start with what's impacting Texas the most. Timely collection, integration, production, dissemination, hey, intelligence matters, information matters, data matters. It determines where you put your resources, number one, and the impact that you're having. Sustainment of effort. When we did the 2013 one, man, we had about 6 hours. We didn't have airtime. We didn't have anything up. Well, now, thanks to, of course, CBP, Air and Marine, Texas Military Forces, and our aviation assets, in the area of operation, which is Starr and Hidalgo County, keep surveillance up 24/7. Around the clock, we keep something up there. And also keep it on the water. You got to be on the water 24/7 as well. A cost-effective technology and capabilities. Why not? If the government, doesn't do very good in inventing technology. Okay, if you haven't figured that out, at least I think everybody in government has. The private sector does. So we don't have to reinvent it. And if we can't spend $500,000 for a camera to help us with detection coverage, or deal with just sensors. Why not wildlife cameras? Okay, which is what we've done. Is leverage it. $550. They get the cheap. They use the cellular backbone to communicate. And so it's technology that works because you can't. We don't have enough bodies to be able to saturate the area to see everything. Achieve meaning, measure what matters is the bottom line. And from our standpoint, our direction was you start zone by zone. And we talk about securing it. We'll talk about some different levels of measurement. Sense of urgency. You got to get people. Everyone's got to get in the game. You got to treat it like something's going to happen tomorrow. We talked about the national security aspect of it. If you've done counterterrorism work, you ought to be worried about it every night. Because there's individuals that come across the border that are captured from countries with a known of terrorism presence. That's happening. It continues to happen. They won't give you the exact numbers and the countries, but it happens, and I look at the stats regularly. And it's concerning, because it doesn't mean that just because only 2 or 3 they're verifiable, doesn't mean that more have come in and we missed it. Those are just the ones that are caught in that regard. So you have to look at border control from that standpoint. This is how we see it. Making it simple, supporting capabilities, detection coverage, interdiction capacity. We recognize you got to look at the operating environment. If there's salt, cedar, and cocaine, that works for the cartels. If there's a national reserve, it works for the cartels because they can move people and drugs into staging areas, and that works for them. We can't see that. If there's a wall, it works for us. It makes it a little more difficult for them, especially if there's an urban interface in that area, and a fence. It doesn't mean that it's a panacea, a wall and everything's secure, but what it does, it makes it more difficult for them, especially around the ports eventually where they've built up some additional infrastructure, where it's more difficult for them to get into the communities. And of course, citizen support works for us, but these peninsulas and the cartel countermeasures, where they're using caltrops, which is basically spikes, spies. As soon as we started operations, they flooded the area with scouts. And these are kids, and everyone's got a cell phone right now, taking pictures. And of course, we're precluded. We're going to always strictly abide by, to the letter in terms of the Constitution and privacies. And we don't have probable cause. We're not going to stop them when they're taking pictures of us. So they do it at our hotels. They do it around. We are constantly under surveillance because they can. Number one, and they've got the resources to do it. One thing about supporting capabilities, you've got to talk to each other. If a trooper can't pick up his or her microphone and talk to a Border Patrol agent, something's wrong. And so we've been able to work that out right now with encryption and all of those things. So it sounds like kind of a petty thing. It's a huge thing when you're doing coordinated operations to be able to talk. A 24/7, around-the-clock unified command center. People got to show up, and they got to be from all the different agencies. Because if you're going to coordinate around-the-clock Marine, ground and air operations, guess what? You better be coordinating with CBP. They've got tremendous assets in that area. You need to be worried about, you need to leverage the blimps. You need to integrate all of it in that regard. The same thing on the river, you know, with Border Patrol assets, in terms of marine assets, DPS assets, we don't need to be duplicating, so you've got to have constant coordination. This is that unified command structure from a law enforcement standpoint, how it fits. And believe me, this is straight plagiarism. It works in disasters and it works with the military. Well, we in law enforcement can suck it up and look at, things that have worked. And the bottom line is it has to be a team approach. Data, there's always, and this is, the public's got a right to expect something from the money that they spend. And since the state is spending money that's really not allocated, or shouldn't be, to securing the border, there's always people want to know different data. And of course, we've decided it's easier for us to, regardless of what we think the measures ought to be, at the end of the day, we need to be in a position to provide all the information to the public and post it on the web page and to the media and the legislature. Let them scrutinize and evaluate and look at it and decide, whether their money is being used appropriately. And this is what we did, and again, this is kind of, again, copy of the military, but instead, the defense in depth we decided on is not defense in depth in terms of horizontal, but vertical. And the reason for that is if you get on the roadways, you get in the communities, they're going to get a certain percentage of that is going to get north, period. Because they've got the numbers. And we don't want anything to get north. We want to draw lines. We do want defense in depth, we want to do it vertically. And so a vertical stack, and we want all that stuff to be integrated in that regard. And so we start on the river, tactical, okay? You've got to have boats there. That you got to be operating around the clock. Ground sensors. Border Patrol's got a lot of money invested in ground sensors. And that's a great tool. The problem with that technology is what? You get a hit, an alert, that's it. And you don't know what it is. And so and after a while, you get desensitized to that. Well, maybe it is, maybe it's not. And so there's some limitations to that technology, but you can put more out there, so it's good. And if you integrate those with our aviation assets and coordinates, and if you got an aviation asset that's high altitude, you can slave one of those MX-15s over there and see it, they can tell, yes, it is something. And by the way, when you got the air assets, you can lock onto it. It's very difficult for them to escape at that point in time. Same thing for the tethered balloons, the aerostats. They have great military resource that's been provided to CBP. We'd love to see them get 5 more, and just in the Rio Grande Valley. Because you got river shed, you cover the river at that point in time, it increases your chances. And again, all that needs to be integrated. The detection cameras, drawbridge cameras, is something the state, we right now deployed over 4,400 of them. I say we really did. Border Patrol deployed them, which is a clue that they work. You're not going to get them to deploy something that doesn't work, okay? And the advantage is because it's these wildlife cameras, then you're using the cell phone, you're using email, and in fact JPEG, you can distribute this all the way down to the iPhone. And what we've done, we put it on a geospatial platforms, and we got troopers riding with Border Patrol agents. They look at the iPhone, they get an alert. Now they see, oh yeah, okay, there's a picture. Okay, that is smuggling event. Now let's respond and coordinate that response. Observation towers. Border Patrol calls them raid towers. Again, it's like a mini aerostat. It has that video capabilities around the clock. There's no detection capability on it, but it's still, someone can look at it and see it at all times. And aerostats, helicopters, medium altitude aircraft. Getting this aircraft is so important when you can be at high altitude and you have the same type of tools that the military has used successfully elsewhere. And I say MX-15 is just a fancy term. You have flare, and you also have the reach. You can look 3 miles off, 5 miles off, and read a license plate to give you an idea. Perspective. But when you're flying over the river, that's very helpful in terms of detection, and certainly is in terms of interdiction. Now this is what I touched camera, the 4,400. This is what it looks like. And that's kind of how it works, very simple. There's nothing to it. Very simple technology. It's already been built. And this is how, at the end of the day, when you get the detection, here's an example of, just one apprehension with 525 pounds. That's a clue. We used to call that the FBI. okay? You know, when they're walking that direction, okay, they're coming north, and they're carrying things that look like that, you know, and they're putting it in the vehicle, that might be a drug event. Here, more examples. This was, they put a bounty on our cameras right now, the cartels have, which is another good point. I mean, they're frustrating them. They're out there looking for them. Here's one that shot one of our cameras. Now, you know, you're not very bright. You didn't think, you know, when you're shooting a camera, are we not going to get a picture of that? So we, and, you know, by the way, I run this program through the Texas Rangers, so it's pretty easy to go investigate this at that point in time. We had one Yahoo found one, took it back, sitting in his living room drinking a beer, okay? And the thing was taking pictures of him, okay? So he finally figured it out, took it back and tried to and put it back at the location he found it at, but he didn't get the installation at the right angle, so we had to go back. But it gives you an idea that and this is simple. And I give credit. Border Patrol's been doing this. Their sensor team has been designing these. When we give them to them, and we'll go out with them. We'll send SOG, and we stood up a state guard, to expand their capability, because to keep them going. This is what it looks like from a detection, coverage, and interdiction. We said, hey, the secret of this is detection coverage is what you got to measure, and your interdiction capacity. Okay, you got to be able to detect, and you can't use people alone. You don't have enough people. So how do you get technology involved in it? And you can integrate all of those things. And these are examples of cameras, Cortina units. That's really when we put a trooper in a Border Patrol vehicle, a Cortina unit. Border Patrol's term, they call it, and it works very well because sometimes there's state jurisdiction and non-federal jurisdiction in the situation. Or the U.S. Attorney will not take the case because of the low threshold. We don't need DEA to investigate. We can do that ourselves at a state level. We don't have to, you know, try to get DEA to divert resource from the cases to move it into this area. I talked about smuggling and how do you prioritize. And you know, we'd already done it for gangs in Texas, set up a tier system to be able to prioritize because we've got so many special agents and too many gangs. How do you prioritize? And what are the variables that you use? And for us, it's about movement across the border. And right now, Star and Hidalgo would be a tier 1. You can see the other ones, the levels they're at. And no one was, you know, when you start colored charts, people go, oh, that's great. What the heck does that mean, you know? Well, you know, I'm not very, you know, like I said, I like colors, you know, I like pictures. That's what I do best with. But there's got to be a way to at least, you know, how do we describe what we're trying to achieve? And what have we achieved in an area, and how can we prove it? Well, so we looked at this as at the high level, you know, limited to no, partial, and all the way up to continuous and overlapping. And that way, you get to an effective rate. And this is what the details are, though. The devil's in the details. Well, how do you know? Well, when you've achieved substantial control, do you have day and night varying controls? Is your interdiction response, you know, more than 95% effectiveness rate? Is your day and night aircraft patrols around the clock? Do you have, you know, secondary coverage on trails and primary coverage? Is it overlapping? Is it continuous? Is it redundant? All of these things. And oh, by the way, you grade it by, if you haven't got those, you know, even reliable interagency communications, you don't even have minimal control in that area. Don't even bother pretending you're still unsecure until you achieve each one of these things. So really what we did is say, hey, if you did grade your homework by this, you're really grading it a lot harder than you would grade otherwise, and make it difficult, and also make it transparent. So you can use a system like this and say, okay, what counties we have operational control of right now, based on this definition? What counties are unsecure based upon this? And minimal control. Residual impacts. Well, there's got to be an impact. I mean, if there wasn't, then why even secure it? If there's no risk to the public, there's no consequence of an unsecure border, there's no point in doing anything. And so what residual impacts? And I was able to testify before, because again, it said in rocket science that when you do these surge operations, this is what's going to happen. You know, first, you're going to decrease the amount of drug that's smuggled between the ports of entry. They don't make any money until it goes into the market and comes back out, period. Decrease the amount of human smuggling between the ports of entry again. Now, this is less influenced, okay, with the cartels by security, because they make money even when we get them. And if you talk about children and family units, okay, they're from Central America, they're going to claim asylee status. And when they seek that status, they're going to get in anyway. So they can come across the bridges, and there's no deterrent. By the way, except unless they're MS-13, hardcore MS-13, and oh, by the way, there's MS-13 hardcore at 13 and 14 years old. Okay, but unless they are, they're really not a security threat. Okay, there's policy issues that I know our legislators are worried about when you have a whole bunch of people coming in, but from a security standpoint, from law enforcement, we don't worry about that. There's enough cartel operatives, there's enough transnational gang members, criminal aliens, and others coming through that do constitute a threat to the public. You increase the amount of drugs smuggling on the international bridges, because what? You're displacing it from here, it's going to go more on the bridges. Cost them more. We're going to have to be dealing with more corruption. We're going to get more seizures along those lines. And of course, the human smuggling in the adjoining areas, what you're going to do is you're going to displace it. And we said before, zone by zone. We adopted the Border Patrol zones. They've got, for example, Stark County has 5 Border Patrol zones directly on the river. So we use their polygons rather than anybody else's polygons and say, okay, Zone 3 and subzone 3A was the most problematic subzone and zone and station and sector in the nation. We'll start there and work east and west. You're going to decrease the amount of drugs to seize the interior checkpoints. Border Patrol has interior checkpoints. Has anybody been through a Border Patrol interior checkpoint? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. You drive, you're off the border, you're over Brooks County, and all of a sudden you stop, and you're inspecting nationality, and they're very polite to go through that. Those are very, I got to be careful because I promised our partners not to criticize those, and I don't, but I kind of do, right? Because at the end of the day, those things are great for statistics. You're going to make a lot of seizures, and you're going to arrest a lot of people, but you're going to push a lot of crime, create a lot of crime by, what happens is coyotes will get the illegal aliens east and west. They'll track through the ranch lands, go up north, and cut back up, and they hook up and go on. Problem with that is they're committing crimes as they go along, okay? And I say crimes, property crimes, and putting, and certainly ranchers and farmers in fear. But they're also deserting people, leaving people to die. They're also committing crimes, some of those people, and the illegal aliens preying on some of the people. So it's a problem. Just to hit there, by putting it there, creates crime, then ironically. But at the same point, and it doesn't keep it out of Texas. So that's the decrease the pursuits and bailouts in the interior counties. You would expect that. But keep in mind, if you can decrease the amount of drugs at the interior checkpoints, then you've done something correct because it didn't get that far. And of course, decrease the overall amount of people being smuggled into Texas and decrease the crime in the area of operation. And this is just as a result of ongoing operations. In the area of operation, Star and Hidalgo County is where we focused. You can see that drug seizures, even though we dramatically increased, we brought Texas Rangers, we brought our tactical units, we brought troopers from around the state, far away as Perryton, Texas. Anybody know where Perryton is? It's a 13, 14-hour drive, and the trooper gets there, works 12 to 14 hours for 7 days straight, and we send them back, and they go back to their regular job. It's the only way we could have done it, because you had to put people there, and for us to do it, we had to take them elsewhere. And of course, it does impact other areas of the state. Legislature got it, governor gets it, and they gave us 250 additional positions to permanently place down here, so we don't have to move people around. And believe me, it's a lot better for the organization and our people to be able to do it that way, and it's also more efficient and more effective. But as you can see, Brooks County is where we have the Falfurrias checkpoint, a 60% drop. Look at the numbers in terms of drop. And same thing with Kennedy County, the Sarita checkpoint. And as you would expect, we pushed it east and west. Apprehensions. This is when we began operations, June 2014. It was the 17th. I got a letter from the governor, speaker of the House, and Lieutenant Governor, and said, go do that saturation patrol thing. And we began operations 5 days later. Right now, the drug seizure reports of entry, as you can see, as predicted, like no kidding. They've dramatically increased in Cameron County, now 190%. In Laredo, 61%. We'll push it to the flanks. The advantage of pushing it to the bridges in Laredo is you don't get the Gulf cartel doesn't have to fight with the Zetas over that. They can sneak it through. This is their checkpoints I talked about. You've got a 79% reduction in one and 74% reduction in drugs seized at those checkpoints. Bailouts. And this is, the coastal bend. They became a part of our inclusion in border strategy because of the sheriffs were getting hammered with these bailouts. And as you can see, they dramatically dropped by 76%, which is the South Texas Property Owners Association much appreciates. And using EPIC data, let's use DEA data, because that's one thing the data I was using was DPS collected data through our partners submitting it. But anytime we have the data and we're also the ones evaluating it, that's a problem because everyone's going to be circumspect. Well, maybe we're not collecting it correctly, that we might be hedging it for our own benefit. Well, you look at DEA's data, so this speaks to two things. One, yeah, you can see it consistently that by focusing on 2 counties, you can reduce the overall amount because the law of big numbers, the law of large numbers. There's so much coming through the 2 counties that there's still an overall reduction in the state by 20%. And DEA collects this local, state, and federal drug seizure data for 150 miles. And you can see the value of drugs to compensate not just weight, because the cost of drugs, heroin costs more than marijuana. Marijuana weighs more than heroin. So how do you do it? Cost is one way to do it. You can see the differences, what's happened in terms of Rio Grande Valley. Now you get into crime reporting. One of the problems with crime reporting, because this has been used many, many times about, well, how do you know when you're impacting crime in an area? Now, the state, like many states, uses the index crime, the FBI's index crime, uniform crime reporting, and those are the category A offenses, which means there's really 8 offenses that it tracks, and which includes arson. And these offenses were picked back in the 1930s by chiefs of police to determine the crime environment, the criminal environment in their communities. And you see it used today, and you'll hear it today. Crime is down 4.7. I mean, this is something because law enforcement wants to prevent crime. Okay, we capture how many arrests we make, but the more important stat is the safety of the community. And there's direct studies in terms of violent crime and economic growth in communities. If one goes down, the other one goes up. One goes up, the other one goes down. So there is a strong correlation between crime and quality of life in a community. Well, you can see 12.3% reduction in Hidalgo, and Star 17.5. Why that's important? The rest of the state was minus 4.7. So it's unusually high, and of course it matches up with all the other correlations. But what's even more so is the violent crime. Because the rest of the state, violent crime has increased by this last year, or in 2014, 2015, it increased 3.6% statewide. And yet we've got decreases in the area of operation. So it's, there's advantages to securing it to the immediate community that are impacted because of the crimes that are committed and the proliferation of organized crime. Uniform crime report statistics does not include kidnappings. It doesn't include human trafficking. It doesn't include drug trafficking. It doesn't include extortions. It doesn't include public corruption. All the things that we're seeing and all the things that the cartels engage in, it doesn't count. So how do you really tell? So actually, we've had a far greater impact on the community if you looked at the National Incident-Based Reporting System, which the state legislature and governor has directed during last session that the state will adopt. So there'll be transparency on all data relates to all crimes, and the public will have that. And you can still have the index crimes and look at it, but at the same point, you have all the data, so you'll know how many extortions, how many kidnappings in the area. McAllen for the FBI is the kidnapping capital of the nation right now. No surprise. I mean, duh. I mean, you would expect, because that's part of the operations. That's how they operate. And does that impact the community? But does it count towards crime? No. Right now. So you get kind of a distorted view. And unfortunately, because it takes a while to get a baseline, to get all the agencies to convert the record management systems to national incident-based reporting, it's going to take a little bit of time so we have baseline so we can actually see what the real crime environment is. Because, hey, crime has changed over the years. I mean, it's increasingly organized, transnational, Okay, it's transitory, it moves. Okay, it's discrete, meaning it hides within the uniform crime report. It's not reported, so you don't see blips along those lines. Okay, and it has I would argue, in terms of a more dangerous impact, because it's conspiracy based as opposed to incident based. An example is when gangs get out of the ripping off car stereos and move into prostitution. That's an impact, especially when they recruit children. And that's something the gangs, it's a very lucrative business for the gangs to do. And it does have an impact, but more one kind of an invisible impact in your communities. I'm going to show this only because the border's everywhere, by the way. When you get right down to it, there's not a community that's not impacted by it. And I said all the way to Perryton, Texas, we've got examples that nexus is there. But at the same point, in law enforcement, we're concerned about our officers right now, simply because in the lab, what's happened in the last couple of years, certainly the attacks on Dallas police officers, we've lost troopers as well. And I'll just show this to a recent event, and I show this because for our troopers' sakes, because there's too many ambushes going on right now. High-speed chase. Okay, this is actually an Amarillo, out of Amarillo. So off the suspect on the right is shooting at all police officers, and it's about an 85-mile pursuit. They're about half a mile into New Mexico at this point in time. This is the state trooper with his dash cam, which is important to have video, by the way.
We rode to a stop just west of the South Fire Driver.
Yeah, the reason I do that is not to, it's very difficult when you shoot somebody. I don't want to make light of it in that regard. And of course, our trooper didn't make light of it. We lost Trooper Scott Burns, because when you get in those ambush situations, and as a trooper, you're always rolling. And you can't stop fast enough and you can't react fast enough. And Scott Burns was killed when he did the same thing, and he turned on somebody, and they stopped faster and started engaging him, and you can't get out of the car. You're stuck, and you can't shoot. Well, I don't know if you can tell or not, what he did is took his M4 and laid it over the dash and fired outside the window. So he fired outside the patrol car and hit him. This is why he was able to do that. The subject's not dead. They removed all of the bullet next to the spine. But to give you a point, immediate, that's the type of environment we're in, and they got to be able to react. But at the same point in time, they got to react the right way. It's a challenge of law enforcement. We're responsible for every contact we make, and we video it. So, like the military does on those gunships, And then there's many people that can take a look at it afterwards and judge, was it right, was it not right? And of course, this is a different tactic. I'd like to say that, yeah, I invented it, okay? No, it's something that he did just by the spur of the moment. To be able to, it has applications. And of course, I'm showing you it just simply because it was part of my PowerPoint. And the last slide I had on it, I thought that it is relevant because we do get ambushed. And of course, we're concerned based on the threat environment and DEA reporting, other reporting in terms of what the cartels becoming increasingly frustrated, okay, in the area of operation. And we realize that. And we don't care. That's their problem. When we do that, we raise the threat level and recognize that, hey, these same people that butcher people, women and children, they got no problem, except that they look at it from business interest, and we got to be very careful when we operate down there. And I'm very proud of our men and women to be down there because it's been a great sacrifice. But I can say this, hey, the strategic intent of the state has always been to get out of it. And believe me, our federal partners can do it. They can do it alone, and they can do it without any question if they get the resources to do it. It's not rocket science. They can do it. They've done it before in other locations, and they can do it again. And that's from a lowly state perspective for me. And I open it up for questions. I think that, or no, I got a couple of minutes. Yes, sir.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. I heard you give a presentation to the Energy Security Group a year ago, and you had some advice about people who want to visit Mexico,
Yeah.
and I've quoted you. I think the people here may benefit. I've used it several times with my 4 children that were going to go on vacation down there. Would you share any recommendations about vacations to Mexico?
Yeah, don't go. And I hate to say it, I mean, and I got a call from a senator the other day. I mean, there's the NFL's got a game down there in Mexico City, and they're telling the players don't go outside the hotel. He asked, well, what? They just keep them in their mind on the game? No, keep them alive. Or because the kidnapping is a cottage industry right now, and there's used to be in terms of Cancun, places like were resorts, where the off places aren't the off places anymore. Acapulco's not off. So, and because of that, I strongly, my own kids, I make sure that they know at least what their dad thinks. It doesn't mean they obey me, okay? They sure know what I think on that, and anybody that asks. It's just not worth it. It's not worth it right now. And Mexico is so important to us. Hey, there are, and I'm from El Paso. I'm an Army brat, and so I know what Juarez is. I grew up around Juarez, and just the cities. It's a dual city. It's linked. Reynosa and the same thing in McCow. It is, and it's a shame that the cartels have taken over northern Mexico and really compromised and undermined an entire generation of youth in Mexico into the cartel. And so that's what's happened. And unfortunately, you can't investigate your way to success, the border control. And you have to control your borders when they make profit from it. And as long as there's an unending demand for child prostitution, for drugs, and other contraband, they're going to find a way to get it in. Well, we don't want it to come from Texas. Yes, sir.
I had 2 questions, if I may. Number one, you alluded to an issue with judges, federal versus state. I'm wondering, after you do all this work and catch these people, what happens to them and what should happen to them?
Well, it just depends on what violation you're talking about. There is no state immigration law. Make no mistake about that. At the same point, we take an oath to the U.S. Constitution. If a trooper stops somebody that has reasonable suspicion or probable cause that an individual is violating a federal law, including immigration, we refer it to the appropriate federal agency. In the border region, that's Border Patrol. And they come and take care of it. In different parts of the state, ICE has that responsibility. So that's how we handle, that. We don't enforce immigration necessarily. But there are some things that are concurrent jurisdiction, is what I'm talking about, where, and the state also put money into border prosecutors unit. And our federal partners here know how to conduct enterprise investigations. When you're looking at the entire enterprise, it's what we used to go after La Cosa Nostra when I was in the FBI, and the Gambino family. You don't care about the crime, you just go after that entire entity and use these team type of approaches and infiltrate that long-term series. Well, they invested in border prosecutors that can help us do that, and we have them embedded in all our offices along the border. And what allows us to do is, like, for example, if the federal government chooses not to take that case because it didn't meet the threshold and Border Patrol seized 100 pounds of marijuana, well, guess what? Border Patrol, that's a violation of law. If you let the person walk, then we do it again tomorrow. So, as border prosecutors, they take that case. And we'll take those cases. What they don't take, because of threshold, they have a threshold amount, we'll take it. And there's advantages to that. I'll use an example. A Cortina unit, Border Patrol agent, trooper, walking together, pick up tracks, take it to a stash house. You've got 7 people chained in a place and 2 females that were pregnant. Okay, that they rescued because they've been dehydrated. And and they were going to let the smuggler, okay, that was sitting on the couch, walk. Without prosecution, because there's so many smugglers, so little time. And wait a minute, call the prosecutor. Yeah, we'll take it. Heck yeah. well, that's a state violation against smuggling, we'll take it. So it's a collaborative approach, and I'm not throwing rocks at our federal partners. They've just decided along these lines, okay? And you're always going to, from a law enforcement, you're always wanting the prosecution. They've got thresholds along those lines. We can't let anything fall to the gap, is what the legislature and governor has been clear about. So we have to make sure all of it is taken care of in that area. The one thing I will say is that we ought not, one thing should be prosecuted every time it happens, assault on federal officers. When you throw a rock at a border patrol agent, okay, when you shoot, and of course I take it personally, I have to work a murder, and my DEA counterpart will remember, Andrew Kirpnick back in the 90s, been on for a year, Russian immigrant, spoke Russian, picked up Spanish, 2 kids, he was killed by 2 drug traffickers. Escaped back into Mexico, were eventually able to get him. You got to go after, if they think that they can get by with assaulting and trying to drag border patrol agent in the water, those things got to be taken care of. And if they decline prosecution, our board of prosecutors has been very good and quick about taking it. It's a state violation. We don't have any problems. So and that's important, because when you attack a border patrol agent, you're really attacking, the U.S. You're attacking all of law enforcement. And so we take that seriously, and I'm very proud that the legislature put money to establish a board of prosecution. Yes, sir.
My second question was, how is the great and wonderful wall going to affect any problems on the border?
Hey, we've never been against anything that will make it more difficult for the cartels. Plain and simple. If anybody's been to the Rio Grande Valley and looked at the Serpentine River, you can't, how do you build a wall when there's large parts of Mexico further north than Texas? And the same thing for places in Texas that are further south than Mexico. You can't, with these peninsulas and the way the river shifts along those lines, it's difficult to just how that's going to be done. That said, there's no question that any barriers that are put up in place are value added to us, especially on these refuge areas. We're not even allowed to build, Border Patrol's not allowed to build infrastructure in some of these refuge areas. Some mosquito's going to die, or some, I don't know, monarch, some exotic, something is going to die. The bottom line is it works for the cartels and against us. When I talk about operating environment, there's things that work for them and against us. A wall, okay, a fence works for us. But you got to have, once they climb it, because they'll climb it, we got pictures of them, ladders, climbing over the fence, they'll go under it, they'll go through it, they'll end up at, building parts in Mexico. If you don't secure it by being able to detect when they do climb it or approach it, and oh, by the way, and interdict them when they get over, which means you got to have border patrol agents and you got to have detection technology. So look at all of those things, and no place is the same. It's not hard to secure Big Bend area. Okay, I think I can do that with a tower and a pair of binoculars. Because it takes them so long. You can detect them when they come across. It takes them, the terrain is so difficult, it's very difficult to stand up a pipeline through that area without being detected. So the strategy would change what that would look like in that area. Yes, I'm sorry.
How successful, or is there any oversight on the billions of dollars paid by the federal government to Mexico to secure their southern border?
Above my pay grade. So I don't know if there's oversight. It would be congressional oversight along those lines. And the southern border, you can say, well, is the southern border secure? Well, if it was, then why are we getting so many other than Mexican nationals out of Central America? And the ratio is about 70%. It's kind of remained that way since 2014. So, I've just asked the question. I'm not saying it's not. But Mexico got to deal with something that unfortunately, there's not been a country that I'm aware of that's been able to address an organized crime problem unless they first address a public corruption problem. Because they don't care how they compromise the government, threaten or by bribe. And if you don't have, you lose your democratic institutions and rule of law if it's undermined by corruption. And that's a problem. The security, how secure it is south, I would be circumspect about it. But the big challenge is for us is, regardless of what Mexico does, even if they take out the cartels, there's still a need for border control in between the ports of entry, I would argue. And because it can be done and it can be done, you know, there's no question it can be done, because there's always going to be something that goes on in Mexico. There's always going to be something, someone takes the place. You take out Joaquin Chepa Guzman, well, guess what? Someone else is in charge. You can indict all you want, and it's frustrating. You know, I was involved in, you know, at least from a headquarters standpoint, and some of my DEA counterparts in here was, you know, Juan Garcia Abrego was the Gulf Cartel. He was a big guy in Brownsville. He had his kids going to Brownsville School District, by the way, even though he was the head of the Gulf Cartel. And we put him on the top 10 fugitive list, and eventually got him arrested. The only reason we got him extradited is because the Attorney General was so upset that he had his kids in public schools in the U.S. and just told him to put them on a plane and send them back. But even then, guess what? Did the Gulf Cartel go away? No, it didn't. Did we see a dramatic drop in drugs coming through the Rio Grande Valley immediately after that in the 90s? No. They can always replace. And what's frustrating is this, is that the impact it's had, because, hey, Mexico is our partner. It's our #1 trading partner. They're a great ally of us, and it's because of our unending demand, let's face it, our unending demand for those things, the cartels metastasized to something they didn't used to be back in the 80s and the 90s. And now that impact they have is a national security threat to them, a domestic security threat. The cartels are to Mexico. So that's it's not a, it's tough. Yes.
So I get the last question. Are you hopeful about the new administration coming in? Do you foresee any changes, or can you talk about that?
I can't talk about that. But what I say doesn't matter.
I had to ask.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I try to. We do very much to try to stay out of the politics of it and cheerleading part of it. We're always optimistic, and we think anybody can. We don't think it's anybody's. This is a 30-year sin, okay, by both administrations, both sides. So this is something that's been neglected by everybody, and understandably, there's a lot of things to invest in, and no one wants to do it, and it's crept up. But clearly, when I was the foreign director of the Foreign Terrorism Tracking Task Force, and then General Ashcroft asked, and we did a report to him. I mean, one of the things we looked at back then was, if you're going to secure, you got to start with the overseas, okay, process, and you have to do it at the ports of entry, absolutely, both not just the airports, but the marine ports. But you got to do that. You got a southwest border has to be addressed, and that hasn't changed since that report back in November of 2001. Yes, ma'am.
Has the legalization of marijuana in Colorado, Washington, and more states after the November election, is that affecting their pocketbook at all?
I would like to think so, but I'm not so sure that it is. Actually, we've seen marijuana in Starr County, the price go up. So, it hasn't trickled down to the cartels right now. And some of that, and some of the loads that we're talking about, we've got the numbers from DEA cases, and we got them also from HSI cases and our own investigations. But we've seen, heroin is the only thing we can't track right now because we didn't have a good baseline back 2 years ago. But everything else has gone up in cost.
Because heroin's the big
Yeah.
drug now.
Yeah, now, we're catching a lot of stuff on I-40, okay, hydroponic, but we're still catching methamphetamine. Most of that stuff is still coming from the border. It's just when it's on I-40, it's coming from the Arizona border.
Where's the meth coming from? Mexico or further south?
Mexico.
Mexico.
They figured it out. I mean, that's a highly profitable drug for them because what? You just need chemicals.
I saw them moving pot down in bags, huge trash bags, a long time ago in Puerto Vallarta, up in the mountains moving down at night, and it was pretty scary. I should have been there, but
Yeah. Hey, it's a cash problem. Yeah, but true, Jim.
Thank you, Steve. That was awesome. Before we